everyone, you're back in the garage with Bonesaw, and today we're looking at the British Tier 7 Premium Tank Destroyer AT-15A. So a bit of background for this tank. In roughly 1943-1944, when the invasion of Normandy was being planned by the Allies, they realised that once they got onto the European mainland, they would have to face the German-held Maginot Line in France, which the French had built to defend themselves against German aggression prior to the war, and the German-built Siegfried Line, which was much similar to the Hindenburg Line of World War I. And so they decided that they needed something that could deal with German fortifications. And the decision was made that what was needed was a heavily armoured assault tank that had enough armour to withstand the fortifications and enough firepower to break them open and allow enemy infantry and other supporting tanks to capture these enemy fortifications. Now, there were two schools of thought on this. There was the American school of thought and the British school of thought. Now, the Americans, the result of their efforts was the T-28, which is on the American Tank Destroyer line. The T-28 and the T-95. There was also the T-28 prototype, but it's less significant than the T-28 because it never quite eventuated. The T-28 was actually built, but they originally decided, no, the frontal armour of this isn't heavy enough. It's only 254mm of armour, and the Americans said, no, that's not heavy enough. We need more armour, bigger gun. So they upgraded it to the T-95, and in order to take all that extra armour, they had to attach a second layer of tracks on the outside. These tracks are actually removable, and when you actually do take them off, it looks very much like the T-28. That profile's much slimmer. But that was the idea of the T-95. A very slow-moving, heavy assault gun. They did build the T-95. They built about 6 of them, I believe. They didn't ever use them, because by the time they were ready, Germany had already retreated from both the Maginot Line and the Siegfried Line because of the Allied paratrooper operations, as well as the Russians moving in from the east. And so the T-95 was declared largely obsolete. In real life, they were faster than they are in World of Tanks. In World of Tanks, they are one of the slowest vehicles in the game, but overall, not all that effective. In Britain, on the other hand, they took a slightly different approach. In Britain, like with every tank development in Britain, from the Churchill to the Covenanter to the Cromwell, there were two groups vying for their idea to be produced, which idea was the correct one. The first group believed that an assault tank should be based off of a conventional tank with a turret. So from that came the A-33 Excelsior, which will be coming in future patches. It was a modification of the Cromwell tank that had heavier armour plating added to it. It was widened slightly as well. And it still had the Cromwell's Meteor engine, but the extra weight slowed it down, so it wasn't quite as fast as the Cromwell was. Its average speed was closer to most other tanks, about 30 kilometers an hour. And it was declared inadequate. In many ways, it was similar to the M4 Jumbo Sherman that the Americans developed, although it was never used and it wasn't quite as good. Another tank that was developed for the assault tank program was a tank called the Valiant. It was designed by Vickers. Look it up. That's the Valiant tank. Valiant tank, go to Google, type in Valiant tank, and look it up. It is arguably the worst tank ever designed in World War II. It was so bad that it was dangerous to its own crew, mainly the driver. They took it out for trials, and the guy in charge of the trials declared it completely unfit to continue trials and said the whole thing should be scrapped. The other school had more success. They believed that the assault tank should be like a tank destroyer, kind of a heavily armoured casemate with a gun on it. And they're the tank destroyers you see in World of Tanks. So if you look at the British tank destroyers on their tech tree, from about Tier 5 upwards, you start getting, they have the AT nomenclature, that means assault tank. And they all have that fixed gun and that really heavily armoured front. So from the AT2 onwards, you have that 200+ of frontal armour. And they built a whole bunch of designs from these. As you can see, they started about AT2. They had an AT1, but it's not in game. Moving upwards. I believe they got to about AT-27, but the one that was looked upon with some favour was the AT-15. All the other designs were generally rejected for one reason or another. And they looked at the AT-15A, which is this tank here, and they said, well, it's good, the armour is acceptable, you know, it's a good shape, good gun platform, but the gun's really weedy. I mean, a 17-pounder is just not good enough. So they took it away, upgraded it, bought it back, which is the AT-15 you see in the tech tree, and they said, well, you know, that's not quite good enough, can we have a gun based off the 32-pounder? The development team took that idea, said, well, we'll look into it, because the 32-pounder anti-tank gun was based off an obsolete anti-aircraft gun, and so Britain had a whole bunch of these guns lying around. They really wanted to turn them into anti-tank guns. And the design team said, well, the 32-pounder, it's not very good. It's great for shooting down aircraft, but it's not very good for blowing up tanks, so we'll give you a 20-pounder. And that's what they did. They mounted a 20-pounder on it, modified the chassis, and the eventual result was this, the Tortoise Tank Destroyer. It was never used in combat. Once again, like the T-95, it was only completed after the Maginot Line and the Siegfried line had been captured. However, this tank, unlike the T-95, was proven to be quite reliable. The crews really liked it, and because of its large size, it proved to be very stable when moving and firing. However, it was never used in any conflict and declared obsolete before the start of the Korean War. There are some surviving tortoises. I know there is one in running condition at Bovington Museum in the UK. But enough history. I mean, you guys aren't really interested in the history that much. Let's get back to World of Tanks. The AT-15A was the first British tank destroyer to be put in the game. It was a premium tank destroyer, armed with a 17-pounder gun, and it kind of showed the hallmarks of the British tank destroyers, being very heavily armoured. It has 228mm of front plate, 152mm of side plate, and 101mm of rear armour. This thing is an absolute brick. There is a reason why I have named mine Dreadnought, because it's absolutely unstoppable. There are a few weak points. This machine gun port is a weak point, this machine gun turret is a weak point. These two little crew hatches are a weak point, but if you look at them from the front, they're very low profile. Along here, this strip along here is also a weak point, but it's also hard to hit. And the gun mantlet. Now the gun mantlet's kind of a weak point, and it kind of isn't. Generally, shooting through these sections here will just result in it acting like spaced armor and hitting the inner armor and not doing any damage. The real place you want to aim for to damage one of these things is that gun slit, right there on the front. And that is one of the few places we can actually do some damage to this tank. It's phenomenally well armored. I've had a group of Soviet tank destroyers attack me. One was attacking me from the front, another one rammed me in the side and was shooting me at point blank in the side plate. None of them were penetrating me. It wasn't until a T-34 rolled up behind me and shot me in the back that I actually started taking damage. And we won the game anyway because I tied up 5 tanks, all trying to kill me. Speaking of the back, the ammo rack in this tank is located in the rear. Now, surely you're saying, okay, for all this heavy armor, there's got to be a downside to this tank. Well, there is. The traverse speed's only 24. Not amazing, not great. It's not too bad either, but you will find yourself getting outflanked by mediums, things like that, so it's generally a good idea to have a buddy with this tank. Furthermore, the tracks aren't that durable in this tank. Its non-premium brother, the AT-15 and the Tortoise, seem to be more durable, but this thing will lose tracks easy, and you'll notice people will start going for your tracks to try and get around you. The upside of this, though, is the fact that your gun has an excellent arc of traverse. You have roughly 45 degrees to the front, so you can pretty much shoot to cover your entire front arc. And that's great because it means you can increase your armor protection by angling yourself and still being able to shoot at the target. This thing is an absolute roadblock and it excels at urban maps. However, its slow speed means it's not suited to open maps. You can still compete, but artillery will decide to destroy you. For upgrades in the form of equipment and consumables, I highly recommend a spoil liner. It just gives you that extra armor protection for explosions. You know, people when they switch over to high explosive shells try and counter your armor, and it's hilarious when they do, and you just sit there and take like 2 damage per shot. It's lots of fun just sitting at the end of a road and just absorbing everything that they fire at you. Toolbox for increased repair speed. You'll really need that for the tracks, and I always carry a repair kit. Generally for tier 6 tanks or higher, a repair kit's a great idea, and they are for this vehicle as well. For platooning ideas, generally me and Fegelein will pair up. Fegelein is my regular platoon partner, and generally he takes out his Tiger tank, and that generally proves to be a good pairing. The AT-15 generally gets top of ladder matching at about tier 7, and I can essentially be the lead tank, absorb all that damage, and the Tiger tank can provide the firepower. Overall, this is a really fun tank. Its view range isn't that long, and its signal range isn't that long, but it has another fun little trick it can do. Because it's so heavily armoured, if you know where your enemy are going to be, if you know they're going to be hiding in, say, the bushes along the road on, say, Malinovka or Prokhorovka, anywhere like that, you can be the scout. You can drive along ahead of the rest of the team, so long as the enemy doesn't have anything that can A, penetrate you, or B, shell you like artillery. You can just drive along, and as soon as they open fire, you'll spot them, because you can just keep driving along and bouncing every shot they fire at you. An important skill for this tank, however, is acknowledging what can hurt you and what can't. 228mm of armor is great, but you will get matched against tanks that can hurt you. So always look at the ladder, the team ladder when you start a game, and say, okay, from him downwards, no one can hurt me, or from, you know, this tank above, they can penetrate me, and actively avoid those tanks. Also be warned that people do get kind of pissed off with the fact that you are pretty much impenetrable, and they will switch over to premium rounds if they just get too bored. I've been in plenty of games where I've had T-32s sitting at the end of the road plinking rounds off me, and then all of a sudden you can see the blue tracer, they've switched over to APC because they've just gotten annoyed with doing absolutely nothing. But overall, this is a really fun premium tank. I will highly recommend it. It's not quite as unique now that the British mainstream tank destroyers have come in, but it's essentially all the good things about the AT-15 with a rapid-fire gun at a tier lower. The 17-pounder, while not extraordinary in terms of damage, has a high rate of fire, excellent penetration, and it's pretty accurate, so you can put out an astounding amount of damage, as you'll see in the gameplay footage. So here we are on Siegfried line. It's an assault match. We're on the defending team. I'm in my AT-15A, and my platoon mate, Oberst Fegelein, is in his Tiger tank. This is the general pairing we use for this vehicle. We also do some other pairs in platoon games with things like his T-150 or KV-1S, but we find the Tiger works best. This tank really excels on urban maps like this, especially in the defense. So we're just circling around to counter the enemy heavy tank push. So you can see Fegelein moving around trying to see if there's any targets for his long 88. Siegfried line is generally one of the best maps for this tank. You can really excel in these tight streets. As I mentioned earlier, it is good to have a buddy tank with this vehicle. It prevents you from getting outflanked by faster mediums, because although you do have heavy side and rear armor, you're not invulnerable, and if an enemy gets around to your side or rear, they can certainly do some damage. Alright. And unfortunately Fegelein drives in front of me and takes a hit. He does that quite frequently, because he's an idiot. No, not really. It's more he's used to playing on his own, and sometimes forgets to tell me that he's doing things. Now there's a medium behind me, but I'm not overly worried by that. Oh no, there's two mediums. That's more concerning, and I am probably voicing those concerns to Fegelein at the moment. The KV-2 is something of a concern, the Churchill is not. and as you can see, I'm just going to lay rounds into him. But that's the armor of this tank. I've got something shooting me in the back, and they can't even scratch me. So things are mostly even at the moment. It's 4 for 4, which generally isn't that good in a assault game, but
looks like that one went right through.
T-49 shot my track off. As I said, a lot of people tend to go for the tracks,
Let's go.
but even then, my armor is still good enough that I'm repelling pretty much everything being shot at me. Fegelein's just turning around to counter that medium just behind me, while I kill this Churchill. This tank is a tank destroyer, you always have to remember that. It doesn't have that much health, it only has about 850, which is the same as about a tier 6 medium tank. So if something can penetrate your armor, you have to be very conscious of that, because you can die quite quickly. So if Fegelein's dealing with that medium tank, I'm heading into the town to kill off some of these heavies. I'm on a decent amount of health, not great amounts. Both my tracks are damaged, but I can survive. And Fegelein's just been taken out by a T-25-2. But I'm going to sneak up on a Churchill and potentially finish him off. Never leave a job undone. Aim for the turret.
Enemy armor is destroyed.
And that's Churchill destroyed. Now for the AT-2. My armor is better than his, and my gun is better than his. So this shouldn't be a difficult fight. Just shoot the cheeks of his casemate. Unfortunately, the T1 heavy takes him out. I don't get the kill there. It's one kill at the moment. However, I'm now in the town, and we'll begin to see the merits of this tank. Alright, there's a heavy, a medium, and unbeknownst to me, a tank destroyer over here. You can see him on the screen there at the moment, but I hadn't noticed him yet. I was more concerned with the heavies and the mediums, and he turns invisible, so, you know. Oh, now I've seen him, and decided to put some shots into him. Now, the AT-25, the American tank destroyer there, I don't know very much about it. For the most part, he's not able to penetrate me, so I just ignore him. The KV-1S and the Type T-34 are not problems at all. They can't scratch me. They're just, no. One of my great pleasures in this vehicle is just sitting in front of a KV-1S or an IS and bouncing shots from that 122mm gun. This armor will even bounce shots from the BL9 gun on the IS-3. So as you can see, he's damaged me there, probably through the machine gun port. And I unfortunately have not been able to hit him, but that was no damage, and I'm retaliating in kind, slowly but surely chipping away at his health. And at the moment our allies aren't exactly happy. They're pretty sure we've lost this, and the T-25-2's just shown up, but it's all about just keeping a level head here. I've blown his track off, he responds in kind. I'll put one through his front plate, and now I will use my repair kit. Now that's important. You've really got to time the use of your repair kits to prevent the enemy from outflanking you. If I hadn't done that there, he probably would have gotten around to my side, just kept me tracked and killed me. But instead, I finished him off, and now I can confidently roll out and attack the exposed AT-25.
That's gotta hurt.
And thankfully some of the teammates are giving me some praise. And that's the end of the game. 3 kills with an AT-15A.